All right. Well, again, y'all, thank you so much for coming in and participating and watching my presentation. The title of my presentation is Reducing Wildfire Risk in Waltonia, Colorado through Collaborative Forestry Projects. All right, so going through what we'll be talking about today, I'll give some background information, not only on my project, but background information on the project site, as well as project partner. So for those that are unaware of the Masters of Conservation Leadership program, what really attracted to me about this program was that you get to work a project in collaboration with a not-for-profit. I thought that was really cool. I've always been a tactile individual doing stuff by hand, and the fact that I get to work with a conservation organization was something that really attracted to me about this project. So I'll get into some background about the partner organization. We'll go through some of the objectives for the project itself. We'll go into one of my deliverables, which is titled the Forest Treatment Menu. We'll go into my main deliverable, which is the Framework for Collaborative Forestry Projects. And then I'll wrap it up with conclusions, recommendations, my own individual reflections, and acknowledgements at the end. All right, so the Big Thompson Watershed Coalition is the organization that I was assigned to work with when I joined the Masters of Conservation Leadership program. The Big Thompson, I'll refer to it either the Big Thompson, the Big T, Coalition, BTWC. So any of those of you here, just know that I'm referring to the Big Thompson Watershed Coalition. So some background on the organization. The organization was founded in 2013 following devastating flash floods in the Big Thompson Canyon. So to give us some geographic ideas, we're kind of southwest of where I'm currently located here in Fort Collins is the Big Thompson Canyon. The organization has since transitioned in the past few years following the exhaustion of a lot of those emergency funds for the water from the river restoration towards one that focuses on the overall health of the Big Thompson watershed, and then with a specific focus in wildfire management and mitigation activities. The last few years have been some of the driest in Colorado's history, which has also included the largest wildfires in the state's history. My main advisor and mentor for this project is Will Davis, Big Thompson Watershed Coalition's Community Engagement Manager. He is also a graduate of the Masters of Conservation Leadership program in cohort 6, and has been really instrumental in walking me through this project. That being said, when we were getting into the nitty-gritty about their area, Will said that it's not a matter of if these areas could burn, but it's a matter of when. And so it's the very large importance on focusing on wildfire mitigation efforts in northern Colorado here, especially as the climate continues to warm and dry out. And so this photo highlights a wide range of projects that the BTWC has completed in the Big Thompson Canyon, ranging from river restoration, forest restoration, infrastructure enhancement, as well as wildfire recovery projects. The mission for the watershed is, quote, working with others to take action that protects and restores the health and vitality of the Big Thompson watershed for the use and enjoyment of our community. And the vision for the watershed is a healthy and resilient Big Thompson Canyon, benefiting fish, wildlife, and the people it serves through collaborative efforts for current and future generations. So as the organization has transitioned from one of flood recovery to overall watershed health, the coalition has kept a keen emphasis on collaboration and has worked with conservation leadership candidates and projects for the past 5 cohorts. With the transition to overall watershed health, wildfire recovery, hazard reduction, and resilience has had increased importance and emphasis for the organization. These projects have worked closely with community members and key stakeholders in the Big Thompson Canyon and the surrounding communities. These projects have included communications and engagement projects, as well as crafting of action plans for communities to increase resilience for wildfire risks. This photo here was taken in August of 2021 with our current cohort, cohort 11. This was our first field day that we got to do as a cohort. We worked with the Big Thompson Watershed Coalition to thin and remove trees in the Storm Mountain community, which is in the Big Thompson Canyon, to give better access to this little reservoir in the Storm Mountain community, so that emergency vehicles could utilize it as a water source in case of a wildfire, moving through that community. So the Big Thompson works very closely with the Conservation Leadership Program, and I feel very lucky that this was the organization that I got to work with. So now on that, we're gonna move into what the issue is that this project is helping the Big Thompson with. And that is wildfire. Specifically wildfire in the wildland urban interface. Now, those that work in and around forestry projects, this term is quite well known, but for those that do not know, the wildland urban interface, or the WUI, is the zone of transition between unoccupied land and human development. It is a line, area, or zone where structures and other human development meet or intermingle with undeveloped wildland or vegetative fuels. We can see here on the right, this is a geospatial imagery of the Cameron Peak Fire, which was the largest wildfire in Colorado's history, which was only very recent. It was just over 2 years ago. The WUI across the United States is growing exponentially. People are moving to the WUI. People are moving to the Front Range. People are moving to these communities that are interspersed and connected to the wildlands. Roughly 2 million acres of growth in the WUI in the United States per year. People are moving to these areas. They're becoming very popular, and therefore 60,000 communities in the United States are at risk for WUI fires. And the fire that we see engulfing that house above was the Marshall Fire, which, for those that are unaware, was a fire that took place just southeast of Boulder, Colorado in December of last year. It took out almost 10,000 homes in a community that didn't necessarily fit the parameter of what many people think about these WUI communities, these small mountain towns like Estes Park or Waltonia that we'll talk about. But the Front Range itself is the WUI. It is at that level of where the line and where the structures and other human development connect with the wildland. And so the Marshall Fire was unfortunately a very powerful reminder that the Front Range is the WUI, and therefore it is very important to take proper wildfire precautions and understand the risks of living in the WUI. Thankfully, with the Marshall Fire, there were not too many human casualties that were as a result, but we can look at the potential for what can happen in a wildfire in a WUI community when you look at the Camp Fire in Paradise, California, which took place in 2018, which we all are very well aware of. So as the communities continue to grow exponentially, the Front Range here along Colorado's I-25 corridor is noted as one of the fastest growing regions in the entire country. And so as these areas continue to expand, the wildfire risks to these communities, persons, homes, livelihoods will continue to increase, especially as our climate continues its current runaway warming trends. So going to the location of where I did most of my work in my project is this little small hamlet of Waltonia, Colorado. So looking here on the map, it's this little, right here, this little tiny dot circled right there, just past Drake along US Highway 34, making your way to Estes Park along there. We can see here the community is interspersed in this steep walled canyon with very dense vegetation. This photo is taken from the Waltonia home website. So situated along Highway 34, 5 miles north of Drake, Colorado, Waltonia was originally founded in 1908 by homesteaders. Now the community boasts 70 plus parcels and 400 residents. The community sits in a very tight canyon with steep walls on both east and west slopes of the canyon. The vegetation in the community is very dense, with overgrown forests straddling both sides of Waltonia Road. And the vegetation grows quite literally out of people's houses. There's more than a few homes in Waltonia where you can there's trees that are literally growing out of decks, people's houses. The the town was built to be in the forest, but because of that, their wildfire risks are significantly elevated. The community members are a combination of permanent and seasonal landowners with age ranges skewing mostly to over 50 years old. Now, Waltonia was impacted significantly by devastating floods, not only in 2013, but in 1976. The Big Thompson Watershed Coalition worked with community members to assist in those 2013 recovery efforts. And that project included river bankment restoration as well as ecological function recovery. Waltonia is an unincorporated community that falls under the Loveland Fire Rescue Authority, or LFRA, as I'll refer to it, for fire and emergency responses. Community members have discussed amongst themselves ways of mitigating wildfire risk, especially following the significant 2020 wildfire season, which included the two largest wildfires in Colorado's state history, the Cameron Peak Fire and the East Troublesome Fire. Now, the Cameron Peak Fire burned 10% of the Big Thompson watershed, and landowners have done mitigation work on their own, but the Big Thompson Watershed Coalition exists to assist the community members and to facilitate projects to better protect and serve the community. So diving into some more background information that is important to the project. So Waltonia and then its neighboring town, Glen Haven, are older communities in the WUI in terms of demographics. However, there's been a recent upheaval between long-term permanent residents or generational residents and increasing numbers of people that have recently moved into the area, or transient residents who purchased property for a vacation or second home, especially following the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of properties were purchased for getaway houses or residences in this area. This creates a dichotomy between, quote, folks that really live that life and folks that come and go. That was Will Davis, the Big Thompson's Coalition Community Engagement Manager. It's a very large challenge to engage with the community when only half of them are there for only 3 months out of the year, and they're not necessarily interested in the overall health and welfare of the community, and rather utilize the land and spaces for recreational and personal enjoyment. There's a vast range of economic incomes and levels, which are visible by the conditions of the housing opportunities in these communities. You have very old generational cabins that have been in Waltonia since the early 1900s, and then you have brand new, quote unquote, mega mansions that are being built in this area by newcomers that bring wealth in with them, that are also usually skewed to the younger demographic. And older generational landowners may feel that some of these younger individuals don't have the same sense of community or buy-in to the community than those that have lived there for decades before. And wildfire mitigation efforts are really expensive, and it makes community engagement work really difficult when efforts are financially dependent. And there are people that can by no means pay the costs that are involved. It takes upwards of $20,000 to protect your home and the area around your home from wildfire risk, and that's not a little bit of money. More longer term residents are older, but within the last 5 or 10 years, especially the last couple of years, more younger people are interested in moving in and have purchased land for relocation, but do not yet know the intricacies of living in a high risk wildfire environment in the WUI. So Waltonia lies in lower elevation environments in the watershed that are mostly riparian with mixed conifer. So riparian river sort of areas, the Big Thompson River runs through it, and mixed conifer, just different mixtures of forest type. Land management in the last century plus has led to increasingly dense land coverage from vegetated areas that we can see here in these photos. On the left, we see 2017, so relatively recent geospatial imagery. And then on the right, we can see the same areas taken just before World War II. And you can see and note just how much denser these areas have become over the course of the last century. Since the 1800s, land management has focused almost exclusively on home and personal protection, removing wildfire as a natural part of the landscape. This removal has led to a remarkable amount of dense, overgrown forest, thus increasing the amount of fuels that are available to burn. Correlated anthropogenic climate forcing, increased drought and length of drought has also increased, which is affecting the health of the trees and increasing the wildfire risk through the drying of the landscape. Climate change is disrupting landscapes, rainfall, and weather patterns. So we have more people moving to these areas. We have much more denser forest cover. We have a drier climate, and we have significantly more fuels, which is leading directly to much larger and more severe wildfires that have occurred in northern Colorado. Again, the two largest ones were within the last 3 years. So following large-scale disturbance events such as forestry work, wildfires, or blowdowns, significant amounts of invasive species such as thistle and cheatgrass have also developed as well. This is one challenge when dealing with larger scale forestry projects, is there's a lot of disturbances involved. And these invasive species love disturbances. So they're the first to grow back, and there's a need for weed management post projects. This is not an uncommon issue in WUI areas. There's a problem across the Western United States, and working with these rural communities also involves the challenges of land management and ownership, and engaging with communities with people that don't necessarily want to engage. People move to these communities and people move to these small mountain towns for their own individual reasons, a lot of which is that they don't necessarily want to live in the suburbs or a big city. They want to be off by themselves. And they don't necessarily want to engage with other individuals as much. And therefore, it's more difficult sometimes engaging with those kind of individuals with viewpoints and attitudes such as that. Some more historical background information. Forest management and wildfire mitigation goes back to the late 1800s when migrating white peoples wanted to stop all fire on the landscape for human protection, logging, and protection for farms. And wildfire or fire as a means of working with the landscape has been used for thousands of years by indigenous peoples. Following colonialism and migrating individuals to the West, the approach to the landscape has thus changed. And it wasn't really until the 1980s when researchers, scientists, and policymakers realized the issue of forest density and growing wildfires that has become part of the landscape. So the coalition's been present since 2013, and the coalition's work has really been bringing state, federal, and local money to on-the-ground projects that work and benefit the communities that they work with. The Big Thompson Canyon has a lot more communities and people then surround the neighboring watersheds such as the Poudre River, and all of which is surrounded by U.S. Forest Service land. The terrain is very steep, it's inaccessible, and it makes it really tough to do work in these areas. Contractors can only work to a certain grade of the slope, otherwise it is unsafe for themselves and their crews. These steep slopes also significantly increase a wildfire hazard exponentially. As a fire burns, it preheats the land and the mountains above them, thus drying out the trees on the slopes, thus allowing the fire to move very quickly up hill slopes. So again, the 2020 Cameron Peak fire only burned 10% of the Big Thompson watershed. Therefore, 90% of the area and the watershed is still very susceptible to burns. Following World War II, wildfire mitigation efforts became mechanized, which meant that they could further extend the areas that could be suppressed and further extend the areas that removed wildfire as a natural part of the landscape. Furthermore, the burden of responsibility for preventing wildfires has been placed on the individual, the citizen, rather than policymakers to reduce these wildfire risks. We all know Smokey the Bear here, and there's been a significant impact on that marketing campaign. It's too big to go in depth in this discussion right now, but I highly recommend in the Estes Park Gazette reading my peer Parker Allen's op-ed regarding Smokey the Bear. It's worth taking a little peek. So all of these things are all coming together to create this cocktail of potential devastating wildfires in northern Colorado. And another aspect that to go into very briefly is the psychology of living in these areas. People have an idea of what the quote West looks like, what the mountains look like. And well, the imagery and the viewpoints that individuals have seen in their life isn't actually what the landscape is supposed to look like. It is overgrown and overforested, but people look at everything they've been shown their entire life of these Western landscapes, and they think that that's normal, but that's not what's normal. And so people move here to these areas, and then they're told their viewpoints of these viewscapes, like these beautiful forested areas, that's not what the landscape should look like. And it's actually unhealthy for the landscape. And that's kind of hard to wrap their minds around. So all these things come together and has led to massive increases in forest density and then the subsequent wildfire risks. So now we've got some background out of the way. We'll go ahead and dive into what my project has been working with. So essentially, beyond my deliverables, I was a jack of all trades for the Big Thompson. I was doing projects to assist the Big Thompson in their vision and mission of the watershed through supporting a lot of their subsequent projects that they are currently undertaking. Furthermore, I hope to gain a deeper understanding of forestry projects and the best means of communicating the necessity of these projects to key stakeholders and community members. So those were some of the goals that we went into beforehand, and this is where we started to get things going. So the Big Thompson was awarded grant funding through the Colorado Strategic Wildfire Action Plan, or COSWAP, to have 50 acres of treatment in Waltonia. Now, treatments are when you can thin these forests so that if a fire comes through the trees and comes through the landscape, doesn't burn nearly as intensely, it might even peter itself out. Or it just acts as a natural function to remove the undergrowth rather than moving into the crowns or the upper areas of the trees to cause the massive devastating wildfires imagery that we're used to seeing on television. So the Big Thompson was awarded grant funding for that. And I watched and observed and took meticulous notes over the last year, essentially, to compile a 87-page report titled "A Framework for Collaborative Forestry Projects," which I hope to see has uploaded itself into the chat by now. I'm not looking. But the idea being that the Big Thompson can replicate the process for this project in the future, and then, utilize the report as a guideline with action steps and considerations for future collaborative forestry projects. And one other part that we wanted to throw in there was a assistance in the Big Thompson's community engagement efforts. So another deliverable that I'll get into in a little bit is a forest treatment menu. So forest treatment menu and the large report detailing all my observations and recommendations for the organization. So one of the projects that I helped and assisted them, the Big Thompson, is with data gathering and analysis. So in the neighboring community of Storm Mountain, where the graduate program did our reservoir thinning operation back in August, the Big Thompson has another ongoing project in that community. So they have multiple projects in the community, but one in particular is there are 6 different properties where the Big Thompson was working with these landowners to reduce the fuels surrounding their properties, which they could then use to showcase to other members of the community to get more people on board. If you see your neighbors doing something and you approve of what they're doing, you are more likely to want to do it yourself, especially if it's something with wildfire and it could help prevent a devastating wildfire from coming through your property. So I assisted the Big Thompson in pre and post treatment monitoring with forest project manager Zoe Shapiro on the left, Will Davis on the center right, and then myself there in the hat, taking lots of detailed notes, tromping around through the forest, doing both pre-treatment at the beginning of the summer and then post-treatment in the fall. The treatments themselves were done mid-summer. So furthermore, I assisted in the beginning outreach stages for the Waltonia COSWAP project. Again, that COSWAP project is to place these treatments on the landscape of Waltonia to help reduce their overall wildfire risks. So we met with large and key stakeholders such as LFRA, Loveland Fire Rescue, another partner organization called the Ember Alliance, or I'll refer to them as T. I scheduled and led multiple meetings over Zoom to go over these COSWAP projects. We also brought in community members from Waltonia that we identify as, quote, spark plugs. These are, spark plug is the necessary component to the engine that sparks your engine. And the idea being is that we hope to empower these community members to pursue these projects on their own. And to do that, you need to have these community champions, these individuals that are like at the forefront and they're rocking and rolling and they're very much leading from the front. And so as the Big Thompson, we want to identify these individuals and we want to help facilitate their efforts to reduce their own hazards in their own community. So we led a walkthrough as well beyond the Zoom presentations and the Zoom discussions that I worked with the Big Thompson to organize. The walkthrough was really fun. This was one of my favorite days throughout the summer. About midsummer, we, as in myself, members from Big Thompson, key leaders from the Love on Fire Rescue, as well as community spark plugs, met in Waltonia to walk along Waltonia Road to not only gain eyes on the ground for Big Thompson, as so we can actually look at the slopes and be like, okay, these are the areas that are definitely way too steep for us to place these treatments, and also like compares and contrasts the imagery that we see via geospatial tools such as ArcGIS compared to like what we actually see on the ground. So it benefited the Big Thompson. LFRA, this was their some of their new members. This was their first opportunity to go through Waltonia, and they would be the first ones to respond if there was a devastating wildfire in this community. So they needed to get eyes on so that they knew their own individual ingress and egress routes if they were to move up this canyon to help fight a fire. Some of the key individuals that came through and that were very important as part of this outreach project were Chief Tim Sindelbach, Deputy Chief Tim Smith, and Captain Brian Clark. So it was really cool to work with authority figures professionally to assist them in their efforts, as well as them assisting us by them giving us subject matter expertise on wildfire behavior in some of these steep walled canyons. Again, that was a really great time. I really enjoyed that. So going into one of my first deliverables, this is what we call the forest treatment menu. So now, imagine you're going to a restaurant tonight with your spouse, your partner, and you decide to get yourself a burger. Well, you decided internally, your internal variables for that was that you recently had a lot of chicken and you had a salad for lunch. So you made these decisions. You chose to do your burger and your spouse chose to get some salmon because they're of their own individual variables inside. Now, if you're a landowner or you're a private landowner in the WUI, the decisions that you need to make to protect your property are going to look vastly different individually. If you are a landowner that's a rancher that has 500 acres of land, your decision making, what you need to do for your property is going to look a lot different compared to an individual that lives in Waltonia and they have a half acre and just a little tiny yard out front. So therefore, this was a collaborative effort between myself, Will Davis, and Zoe Shapira to craft this treatment menu so that we could bring this to community members at community engagement opportunities so that they could make the best informed decisions and empower them to do these things on their own. We wanted to give really good information about why it's important to do these, why is forestry management important, going into historical suppression, climate change, and the multi-benefits that we've already talked about. We also wanted to give community members an idea of what a home defensible space could potentially look like and the things that you need to do in the different distances between your own property. So the stuff that's very close to your property, you want to completely remove any and all fuels. You want to harden your landscape. You want to harden your home. So you have to be, making different design choices for roofs, decks, patios, sidings, windows, fences, all of which can make a very large difference if there is a wildfire event. And then moving further away from your property, you move into areas where you can focus on removing trees and brush or ladder fuels that go from the ground and they climb a ladder up to the crowns of the trees. You got the trunk and you got the crown up the top. So you can remove those ladder fuels so the fires then burn only on the ground. They don't reach these crowns, which could potentially move from crown to crown, creating a very intense and powerful wildfire. So we wanted to give landowners an idea of what that could look like. It's also important to note for landowners that in these different areas, in these steep canyons, someone at the mouth of a canyon can have a very different forest type that surrounds their property than somebody that lives up towards the top or up on some of these more higher alpine slopes. And so we wanted to give individuals an idea of what best would work on their property. Again, everyone has their own individual variables, and we wanted to give community members and landowners the best possible information so that they can make the best decisions, because what you have to do for a lodgepole pine forest is going to be a lot different than a ponderosa or a mixed conifer. And this little bit of treatment types and goals assists the landowner in making these decisions for them. And we also wanted to give community members an idea and imagery of what this could possibly look like. And we can see in the photo in the top left corner how home hardening and defensible space can save your property. It can save your life. And this home, this very beautiful home there, was spared. The fire burned around it because they had done and taken proper precautions to create those defensible spaces. And we also wanted to give an idea of what the forest could look like before or after, and as well as the patch cuts if that is the proper treatment for their individual property. We also, if someone's going to want to go out and do this on their own, we wanted to give them ways to conduct these treatments. So thin from below is you go around your property and you measure all of your trees using a DBH, a diameter at breast height little tape measurer, wrap it around the tree, and everything under 8 inches gets removed. Easy, simple, thin from below. And then, or you could use variables such as crown spacing. So keeping a good 10 feet of spacing between individual trees or 30 feet of spacing between clumps of trees, because that's historically what these landscapes look like prior to the suppression efforts that have caused these forests to be so densely overgrown as they are right now. And then also a lot of individuals, they, beyond just protecting their property or their home or their house, they very much care about the overall health of the forest. And we wanted to ensure that this wasn't something that was lost on us, that these actions that you can take can really protect and assist in the overall health of the forest surrounding your property, because people care about the forest and the land that is just beyond their property boundary or that is within their property boundary. Some examples of this are that these treatments mimic natural disturbances. They increases biodiversity and understory vegetation, which creates habitats for animals, birds, insects, pollinators, large mammals, and it overall increases resilience to fire, insects, and other types of treatments. So now that checks those boxes for the individuals that really care about the health of the landscape. Now, if you want to do this on your own, how do you go about doing it? Well, you can use mechanical, so large scale mechanical treatments, or using hand tools that you just bought at Ace Hardware, and giving pros and cons and considerations and variables to consider if you're going to choose either mechanical or hand thinning. And then finally, it's just like, what do you do with all the slash? What do you do with all the stuff that you just removed from your property? The easiest one is, and most affordable, is usually building a giant pile, letting it dry out for a year, and then burning it. So pile burning, you just get the from Larimer County here in Fort Collins, Colorado, you just get the permit from Larimer County, and you can go ahead and burn that on your property. And then other ways of getting rid of all that slash is lop and scatter. You take that, you just spread it out everywhere along the landscape. You can hire a contractor to haul everything off site, so a little bit more expensive. But again, these are all just the different variables. Someone that might be that might have fall into a higher tax bracket could afford to haul everything off site because they don't have the time to build these burn piles and then burn it themselves. Or you could rent or get a community to get together to get a chipper to chip and shred all of the fuel and all of the slash. So we just wanted to give these landowners as much information as possible to empower them to take it back with them to do these things on their own. Again, the Big Thompson's a pretty small not-for-profit, and we want to ensure that we maximize our efforts through our educational opportunities. We added a QR code that you can scan if you want, which connects to more in-depth resources for landowners. And I can't take any credit for this page right here. This was, again, a collaborative effort between myself, Will Davis, and Zoe Shapira. This was crafted this fall when I was going through some medical situations, and this was taking everything that we just talked about, these last 6 pages, and breaking it down to a decision-making flow chart. What is your main priority? And then where do you go from there, and what do you do for your property? So this forest treatment menu is one of my 2 main deliverables that the organization can take forward to use in their community engagement efforts. So another big part of what I did this summer was organize and conduct a community meeting with Waltonia residents. This was a really, really cool experience that I very much enjoyed. This was where I felt like I was in my element, was working with these individuals that live out here, hearing their stories, why they want to live in Waltonia, and hearing their appreciation when we're trying to help reduce the hazards in their community, and there was some emotions involved, and it was a very enjoyable experience to help plan and then execute this community meeting. We had a much higher turnout than we anticipated. We got over 20 individuals to come out on a beautiful midsummer Saturday morning, which, in a community of 400, to get over 20 people to show we're pretty stoked about that. The purpose of the meeting was to present ideas to the community about where we think the best places to put these treatments on the landscape, but then also get their feedback. We want this to be a collaborative effort where not only do we come in as the organization with subject matter expertise, but we want to know, like, the people that live there, like, what are their thoughts on it? And that was the main purpose of this meeting, beyond also detailing other projects that the Big Thompson was working on. LFRA, Love and Fire Rescue Authority, was working on a community wildfire protection plan. And we also had stakeholder Aaron Larkin from the Ember Alliance to come through to talk home defense and home hardening, which we already discussed a little bit. Here are some of the media that I put together to advertise for it, for social media, as well as printed flyers that were posted around the community. But the main crux of this community meeting was to get the community feedback, specifically to get their feedback on some of these maps that I built, and I'm going to show you. So we wanted to really get these individuals' viewpoints on the best possible locations to place these treatments. So using a layer from the Colorado State Forest Service Wildfire Risk Calculator, you can see here, based on the different colors, the overall risk to the community. Also, you can also see it overlaid with the different parcels that's public knowledge, publicly accessible information. So we can see here, looking at the map, there's a lot of parcels and a lot of houses right there close to the U.S. highway turnoff. We call that Lower Waltonia. And that's also the exact area that the Colorado State Forest Service has identified as having the highest risk of wildfire hazards. And we felt that it was important to showcase the fact that this part of the community has the highest wildfire risk. And then on top of that, you can see these black outlines of where, at the time, this is where us at the Big Thompson felt that those were the best places to put the treatments on the landscape. And so with each of these maps, we had a question to consider, and folks could move from map to map in a 20, 25 minute, 30 minute little discussion. Folks could move through and talk with us, ask questions, but then also to answer these questions that we pose. So for this map, the question was, this is what the science says for where we should place the treatments on the landscape. We identified these outlined areas based on the best available science and geospatial tools at the Big Thompson to place them in the landscape. And so we just want to know, what are your thoughts on these locations? And then that also flows right into where the individuals, where the community members think we should place them. So we remove that layer, we remove where we felt that it was the best place to place the treatments on the landscape, and we kind of laid it out for the community. So looking here on the map, everywhere that's red are areas that are too steep for us to conduct these treatments. And so you can look at that map and recognize that there's a lot of areas around this community that are constraint that we can't do these treatments on because it's simply too steep, and it'd be unsafe for contractors to go in there with their crews to try and remove these fuels. And so we had this one was kind of like, hey, first map, this is what we think, this is what the science says, but second map, what are your thoughts? What we want you to contribute to our decision-making process. This is a collaborative effort. We're not going to come in here and just tell you what to do. We want you to let us know what you guys think is best. And so looking here on the map, that gave landowners an idea of where we could potentially do treatment. So anywhere that isn't red shaded could potentially have a treatment on it. We just wanted to know, let the community give us their feedback on where they think it could be most beneficial. And finally, the last map was to build upon the community engagement, knowing that this was a multi-month project. The treatments for Waltonia won't even be implemented until next summer, or early next summer at the earliest. And so looking here on the map, we had each parcel identified by a number on a different spreadsheet with the landowner. And these individuals that live in Waltonia, they know their neighbors a lot better than us, the Big Thompson. And so we wanted to hear from them about who in the community do you think would be on board for these projects? Who do you think we need to do more work with? And we had little sticky notes that we could designate green, yellow, red for individuals. But the resounding response we got from almost everyone that came through, at least the folks that showed up to the community meeting, was they wanted this. They are well aware of the hazards in their community, and they very much want to implement these things. And so we had a lot of folks that were already on board, but we still wanted to set the stage for the future engagement if we needed to place these treatments on a property that the individual landowner didn't make it to this meeting. So that was the third map that we presented to landowners. And then following the community meeting, crafted a survey to hopefully gain some more feedback. And that was a really great learning experience for me because I got 5 responses. So, it wasn't the most robust response rate, but that in itself was a great learning opportunity, as well as, crafting the survey. And Will and I spent much longer than we anticipated crafting the questions to come up with what we really wanted to gain qualitatively from these community members. So moving back a little bit, we had a forestry menu. Then we had our community meeting, all of which led to my big final dealio here, the framework for collaborative forestry projects. This report is in the chat, I hope, at this point, detailing these 3 different avenues and subsequent flowcharts for potential collaborative forest projects. So identified these 3 individual ones based on discussions with Will and with Zoe. So the 3 main ones, which I'll go into more detail in a second, are funding contingent forestry projects, streamlined projects, and landowner sourced projects. All of these projects are all very similar. You can see and note all the very similar squares and very similar ovals that accompany them, but they're in different places along the framework and along the flow chart based on the nuances of those individual projects, which we'll go into in more detail here in a second. But generally speaking, funding contingent projects are that it's a shovel-ready project. In order to gain the funding from funders to conduct this project, you have to show to the funders that you have a, quote, shovel-ready project. You've done all the legwork, you've done all the background information. Now you present all that to the funder, like, hey, we just need money and we can do this thing. That kind of project is going to look different than a, quote, streamlined project, where you apply for the grant funding and you are allocated that funding prior to getting a lot of the more finalized details, which come later. And so this Waltonia project, this coast swap project to add these treatments to the Waltonia landscape, was a streamlined project where the Big Thompson applied to this grant from the Larimer County Emergency Services, was granted the funding, and the details of where they're going to place those treatments come later after they've already secured the funding. Now, on the periphery, a framework that can also work as both a funding contingent and a streamlined framework is a landowner sourced framework. So again, we want to empower these community members to do these projects on their own, to at least come to us and want to do these things, to take control of their community. And so very real possibility that a landowner comes to the Big Thompson with an idea of mind and a problem in mind. Maybe they've already secured funding for it and everything. Like say you got 3 landowners that all live at a cul-de-sac and they all come to Big Thompson like, hey, we want to pool our resources to reduce the trees around our community. So if a fire comes to the end of our cul-de-sac, our homes could potentially be spared. And so this landowner sourced framework could be a funding contingent framework, and it could be a streamlined project, but it's enough of the nuances and the differences that it also deserved its own individual framework. So a little bit more of how this reads. On the left is an example. So the action steps, as we name them, are the main parts of the project, the main steps that each project has to conduct. Now, the location in the timeline of these projects are a little bit different for each of the different frameworks, just based on those little nuances I just discussed. Underneath the action steps are the secondary action steps, as I name them, which are, and for this example, collaboration is the action step. Now with collaboration, community spark plugs, those individuals, those community champions I talked about, and then other partner entities or organizations or agencies also are part of the collaborative process. Furthermore, along these frameworks are educational opportunities that are identified. The Big Thompson prides itself on its educational emphasis, where it, not only are we doing these projects, but we're helping to educate the community. We're hoping to empower these individuals to do these projects on their own. And so sometimes along the way of these projects, you have educational opportunities that I identify as the best opportunity to provide these discussions or to host a community meeting to talk about wildfire risk or something along those lines. And so the center photo is the cover photo for my final report. And it's just really cool to see that final report when on the right photo, that's how it kind of started. I had identified and taken meticulous notes throughout the process and kind of just splattered them on a whiteboard here at the library at Colorado State. And it's really cool to see that on the right is how it started, but on the previous page, this is how it ended. So looks a lot neater, a lot cleaner compared to my own gibberish that I can barely read myself. So going into more details about the funding contingent framework. Where's that here? So again, some of these projects require everything to be done, ready to go to receive the funding. And so for this project, you would have your project identification action step, where you could also identify problems, funding, partners involved. You plan your goals, you collaborate, you do your research, you collect data, you put together a prospectus or what you believe is what the project is going to look like, and then you secure your funding. You finalize your implementation plans, you implement the project, you follow it up, and then you improve and adapt the framework. And that looks slightly different than the streamlined framework, where you identify a project, you plan your goals, you collaborate, you developed a draft prospectus, and this is what you think the project could maybe look like, but you need to have everything kind of identified enough that you can apply for these grants where you can secure the funding. And then after you've secured the funding, you can do your outreach, you can do your data gathering, and then you wrap it up in your final project prospectus. And that's where you're starting to really get into the nitty gritty. And this is what the project is going to look like. Then you finalize your implementation plans, you implement the project, then you follow it up, and then you improve and adapt it. Now we move to the landowner sourced one, which again, all have the same action steps and they have the same secondary action steps, but they're in different places along the frameworks. And then also some differences are noted again all throughout the 87-page report. But an example here in the initial outreach, you might have noticed here on the streamlined that we have an established expectations with community secondary action step, which is missing here from the landowner source framework. Because if a landowner comes to the Big Thompson with a very specific project in mind, they already have an idea of what they expect the project to look like at the end, compared to the Waltonia project, where we have this project And we need to get buy-in from the community members. We need to establish with these expectations with the community members what this project could potentially look like. So enough of these nuances and differences that they all deserve their own different framework. So for the landowner source one, it goes project identification, followed by your outreach, your final project perspectives, what you think it's going to look like, your collaboration, you get your money with your funding, then you plan your goals. The other frameworks, your goals came before your funding. But the reason we have the goals after the funding on the landowner source one is, we can have all these high and mighty ideas of what we think the project could do, but we don't quite know exactly what the project can do until we've secured that funding, until we know just the amount that we can treat on the landscape, how much we can pay for contractors to do this work. And so those goals come after we've already secured the funding. Then we gather our data, we finalize our plans, we implement the project, we follow it up, and we approve and adapt the framework. All right. So now going through, this is just a quick example of some of the pages and how this looks like in the framework itself. So this is page 39. It has background information for the organization. What does initial outreach look like? What are the secondary action steps for initial outreach? What are the educational opportunities with outreach? What are some considerations that that decision makers, that these project managers should be thinking about as they reach this stage in the process? This framework, this report, it's an internal document. It's for the Big Thompson Watershed Coalition. It's so that in the future, they can replicate these projects going based on how I witnessed the entirety of this Waltonia project. And so the report has background information about initial outreach, and then it goes into detail about what some of these secondary action steps look like. So for example, here we have walkthroughs. So given that, like, what is a walkthrough? Like, why are we doing a walkthrough? What are some things we should think about or consider? What are benefits? What are small nuanced differences with this secondary action step compared to other frameworks? You can see streamlined, landowner source, and funding contingent. Again, all of this is all in the the big report, which again, still haven't checked the chat yet, but should be uploaded there. And then following the walkthroughs, you have some considerations. So that's how a lot of the report goes, is it has background information about the action step. Then it's got background information and things to consider for the secondary action step, and then further considerations for the secondary action step. I never fully anticipate anybody actually fully reading the entirety of the framework. It's a reference. All of these are all color coded. That was a plug to Will. That was his great recommendation. So if the initial outreach is the light red color, you flip through the report till you get to the light red section, and that's what you're looking for, because you're curious about what we have a new project manager coming on board. They've never conducted a walkthrough before, and that's fine, that's cool. But this way they can have a reference sheet with considerations and things to think about as they go about this step in the collaborative forestry project. So moving towards, thank you again for your patience and listening, but for the conclusions and recommendations, the hope is that the deliverables from my project, the forest treatment menu, the framework for collaborative forestry projects, can provide a lasting legacy and assist the coalition in future collaborative forestry projects. The hope is that the forest treatment menu can assist in answering questions for landowners and provide some empowerment and conduct these projects on their own. At a lot of these community engagement events, we hear the same questions kind of over and over. And we hope that this document can provide a lot of those answers, or at least give them the background information that is necessary to start doing that work on their own end. Then they can come back to us with more detailed questions if they weren't fully satisfied with the treatment menu. We just want to empower these individuals, and we feel that this could be a really great part of the Big Thompson's community engagement efforts, as well as empowering the landowners themselves. Now, for the framework, again, I never expect anyone to read through it. Feel free, all power to you if you want to read all the way through it, but it's mostly as a reference sheet and a guideline for the organization. I want this to be a living document that is continuously upgraded through all lessons learned through each of these processes, to go back to the framework afterwards and be like, okay, what are some lessons learned? What steps do we need to add? What secondary action steps do we need to remove? What do we need to shift around? The idea is that this is a living document, that this can work and assist the Big Thompson for any and all collaborative forestry projects that they continue to produce in the future. I want it to be easily accessible with the color-coded pages. So if you're curious, the new project manager, what do I do how do I decide where to place these locations in the landscape? Well, you go to the locations page or the finalized locations page, depending on the project. And when I was in the Army, we had what were called AARs, or after action reviews, where rank was dropped and you could talk very candidly about what worked and what didn't work without, in the Army, fear of reprisal or anything like that. And the idea is that this document can work in a very similar way to the AAR, where opinions can be shared candidly, things can be scrapped, things can be removed, things can be added, but it's a living document that continues to assist the Big Thompson throughout their collaborative forestry projects in the future. Now, personal reflection. Bear with me here. It might be a little difficult. I learned a tremendous amount through this project. I learned incredible technical skills from my mentorship from Laura Quattrini, the executive director at the Big Thompson, from Zoe Shapiro, forest project manager, and from Will Davis, community engagement manager. I learned really great ways of working with community members on community engagement, how to utilize forest vegetation software, working with the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute, using geospatial tools such as ArcGIS, Google Maps, FatMap, event planning and execution. That was my first ever community meeting that I planned and executed. And there was lots of stuff learned in that process, but overall feeling very satisfied about how that meeting went. Collaborative meetings, organizing Zoom discussions and working with professionals in their professional capacity. That was all these technical skills I learned from this, and I'm very, very thankful for it. But I think the most, one of the skills I gained the most from is the public speaking, leadership, and community engagement experiences from this program. They're going to be directly beneficial to my new role that I accepted and will be working with post-graduation. And I think that those experiences of leading these community members, these community meetings, and being at the front and hearing their questions, their very real concerns of their livelihoods, of their homes, of wildfire hazards, very heavy topics. It was very powerful, and will absolutely take with me as I move on to into my next step in my career. And some other parts of the reflection I feel were very powerful about this project was it was very difficult for me. I gained a true appreciation and respect for working class individuals that really want to do conservation projects, and they care so much about the land and the world around them, but they can't put forth their best effort or focus or time because of the realities of their financial situations. I worked on this project from Monday through Wednesday, and Thursday through Sunday, in order to afford an unpaid internship, I had to work at a restaurant here in Fort Collins, working upwards of 40 to 50 hours. I didn't get a day off in 9 weeks. And that was exhausting. I was totally burnt out by the end of the summer. My motivation was waning. And I really connected a lot with working class individuals that they, like, darn it, they want to do these things, but they have to focus on putting a roof over their heads and food for their families. And they want to do these conservation efforts, but the realities of their economic situation prevent them from doing that. And I very much connected with that situation this summer, and moving forward in my career, recognizing the balance between, economic incentives and conservation issues is something that I will absolutely take with me. If things were compensated differently in the project and program, I would have been so much more into this project, and especially by the end of the summer when I hadn't had a day off in 9 weeks. And I felt that was something that was very important to share and to and to bring with me as part of this reflection. And then on a personal note, this year has been the most difficult year of my life, and all my experiences leading to this point from the military and then working as a mountain guide, I felt really prepared me for the resilience that was needed to finish this project. I didn't really think I was gonna finish this right now, this fall. So I learned a lot about myself, and that's the final part for my reflection here. And so on that note, there are people that absolutely are needed to thank for all their love and support and friendship and mentorship. From the Big Thompson first, Laura Quattrini, Executive Director, Zoe Shapiro, Forest Program Manager, and especially Will Davis. Will being a graduate from CLTL, he knew what the project was looking for. He knew what was expected, and he held me to very high expectations. He wasn't satisfied until the very end, and I appreciated that because he pushed me to be a harder worker and to provide the best possible information for the final deliverables. Project partners from LFRA, Chief Tim Sindelbach, Chief Tim Smith, and Captain Brian Clark. The Amber Alliance, Aaron Larkin and Kirsten Ledger. From the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute, Scott Ritter. Waltonia community members that were really involved in this process that I worked with a lot. Beth Lau, Jim Isaac, and Cindy Purcell. My advisors here at in the Master's Conservation Leadership Program, Brett, Dawson, and Jen, for your flexibility and your empathy with presenting my project on a delayed time frame. I think my family deserves a very special shout out. I wouldn't be here without them, and I wouldn't be presenting without them. On the day I got my diagnosis, my father flew to town, and my mom spent 3 weeks with me as I recover, and I wouldn't be here without them. And then on that note, another special thanks is for my roommates, Evan and Logan, currently above me right now. They've lived with me through these last couple months and have shown nothing but love and support, not a word of complaint, and therefore they deserve their own special thanks. So on that note of thanks, I would like to thank you all for sharing time out of your day to let me present my project and what I've been doing over the last year. And I look forward to answering any and all of your questions. Thank you.